Hello, everyone. I've got something written here. I pray that I can make it through it, and I pray to, do Bruce's life justice. My name is Brady Hayes. Many of you here today probably know me as the trouble child who was always calling Dad, asking for money, and interrupting his Bible studies with my problems and my mischievous friends. But, I'm also Bruce Hayes' oldest adopted son, and to be able to call myself Bruce's son, in the wake of all the people, in his life that he impacted, right, that I'm Bruce Hayes' son is something that is an incredible honor to me. And it's also a responsibility that I feel because of the way that he led his life. So, we've joined today to celebrate the life of a person who put on the full armor of God and wore it day in and day out. My mom was very clear to us. She didn't want today to be a sad occasion. She didn't want us wearing black, and so I'm wearing the same suit, actually, that my father married me and my wife in just a few months ago. We're not here to mourn, though there is a time for mourning. Certainly I've been doing that the last few weeks, but we're here to celebrate Bruce, the teacher that he was, the coach he was, the husband, and for me, the father that he was. And what I'm gonna share with you is the thing that I believe made Bruce Hayes so special in all of those different roles that he fulfilled in each of our lives. Every person in this room understands that Bruce Hayes was different, right? That much is obvious. Just the turnout today enough is something that says to us, this was a person who lived life differently. First of all, I heard he used to make the whole soccer team run a mile if you heard anyone saying any cuss words. So I'm sure some of you in the crowd were responsible for those team punishments. I also understand he would make TikToks about the Great Gatsby and other classic literature, which is interesting, but Bruce was not your average person for more than just these kind of silly reasons. And I think it's really important for us to understand what it was that made him different, why he had such an impact. I spent the greater part of the last 2 years asking God that by some miracle he would save my father. And with every continual bit of bad news, it just seemed like continued to roll in endlessly. That we heard from the doctors and everything like that. I continued to petition for that miracle. And when I knew for certain that we were coming close to the end, a small part of me started to feel as though the miracle wasn't coming. My father, the person in this world who anyone that knows me knows is the absolute person I respect the most, has passed away. And yet, when I look into this huge crowd now, all these people, right, that loved him and that he got a chance to love and impart his duty, his service onto, all of you now who are his legacy, the Holy Spirit within me tells me that the miracle is yet to come. The true miracle, the true lasting impact of Bruce's life, his legacy is his ability to encourage other people to seek God. And his death was too soon, and it is a tragedy. And there's no getting around that. In many ways, Lauren and my wife and I have talked about how it feels unfair, right? That, there are some people who probably aren't the best people that live forever, it seems, right? And then Bruce Hayes passes away so early in a way that just feels unjust. But we know that the most unfair death of all was the death of Jesus Christ, who my father loved so much. And my father wasn't Jesus, but I have to tell you, he is the best example of Christ that I have ever seen in another person. And just as Jesus' tragic death on the cross inspired millions of people, millions of Christians around the world to follow him, I hope that God's miracle is for Bruce's death to inspire each of you to seek Christ and hold fast to that faith. That is what will turn this tragedy into a triumph. And honestly, a pretty good way of doing that is just by following his example. You don't have to necessarily come to church or even open the Bible. Those are great things to do. But if you just watched his example, you're going to learn a lot about him. You're going to learn a lot about Jesus through that example. So let's think about it. Bruce's example. What was it? Well, pretty obvious he was a good person, but what made him good? People aren't good on accident. I'm certainly not good on accident. It's pretty easy for us to be selfish and deceitful and resentful and all of those things, right? Well, for me, what made Bruce special was his service. He was a humble servant of the Lord, and it did not matter who you were. He would rush to meet the needs of a complete stranger all the time. I saw it constantly throughout my childhood. And he was giving in multiple ways. Bruce gave generously of his money, his time, and of his effort. And so I'll give you an example from my experience with Bruce over the years of each of these ways that he served people. So first of all, I've got an example about money. This is a small one, but it's important. I remember this one time we were just walking around the neighborhood together, probably throwing the football around, and Dad noticed that there was a man in the middle of the road whose car had run out of gas. Without thinking, Bruce rushed into action. He helped push the guy's car off the road. He grabbed me along. He's like, Brady, come on, we're helping this guy. It's like, okay, fair enough, right? He just dragged me along. And we pushed this guy's car off the road. He makes me run and go grab the gas can that we use for the lawnmower to fill him up a little bit. And then Dad gave him all the money in his wallet and just sent him on his way. And that was it. Of course, as a kid, in my mind, I was thinking, Dad, who was that? You could have given me that $20. Because he was very stingy with me, but, gave everyone else the money. Anyways, I'll settle that with him in heaven. But I remember he told me, Brady, if we can help, we help. And that was so simple. It was such a simple thought. And yet those small acts of generosity are the sort of things that can alter the trajectory of a person's life. Just remembering, who was that person? What motivated that person to give me that money, help me out when, they had no obligation to do so. 2 Corinthians 9:7 calls us to be cheerful givers. Not to give begrudgingly, not to, okay, I guess, I'll tithe if I have to. But to give to others with a smile on their face, right? And Bruce was a cheerful giver. Giving that stranger $20, realistically, probably the best part of his day. So that was a way that Bruce served with his time. But he also served, with his money. But he also served with his time. And this was the story of a woman that we called Grandma Faye. Somehow, Bruce came across this elderly widow at Kingsland Baptist, at the church we went to as a family. And my dad's favorite book of the Bible was James, the book of James. And James 1:27 instructs us to look after the widows and the orphans. Anthony and I guess we were the orphans, right? We were adopted. But the widow, he saw an opportunity, and Bruce was determined to fulfill James 1:27. When I was 9 years old, he introduced this stranger, this woman to us, and he told my brother and I to call her Grandma Faye. And for years, we would go to her tiny little apartment, and we would just talk with her about school and about life, and for all intents and purposes, I think we treated her like she was our grandma. I even lied to her about my grades like I did with my other grandparents. So it was pretty great for us. We kind of took to it well. And Bruce would care for this woman who was only recently a perfect stranger to him. He would just sit and talk with her, visit with her for hours so that she never felt lonely. He found her an old VCR player so that she could watch all of her movies. And he set aside time out of his week, out of all the people in his life. He made time for this woman every single week for years to drop in on her and check in until the very end of her life, to treat her like family with no other reason than to demonstrate the love of God. And that was something that only Grandma Faye and our family knew about. As Boyd mentioned before, it's not like he was publicizing these things. He honestly didn't want anyone to know, right? He wanted to serve in silence, just carry his cross, do his duty to the people in his life, and that was it. No credit needed. And again, it didn't matter who you were. If you had a need, Bruce would give you his time and his full attention. And here's the thing. The hardest part about me writing this eulogy was, boiling down the summation of Bruce Hayes' life into just 3 examples of service. Even in his final days, some of his former students know, when he no longer had the strength to carry on conversation, he kept inviting people over to come and see him so that they could get their closure, so that they could get their final words with him, even when he couldn't speak. Because he wanted that for them. Even though he was exhausted, he would grind himself down absolutely just to make sure that everyone who wanted their chance to say goodbye to Bruce Hayes got to. And that was an act of service. But the example of effort that I will give, Dad serving with his effort, came on the last day of his life, just hours before he passed. I walked into the room to say my goodbyes, tell him that I was heading back to San Marcos, and I knew the end was near. At this point, he hadn't been able to talk for at least a day, and I didn't really expect a response. I remember I told him that I loved him, and that I would take care of Mom, and that I would see him in heaven. And as I was leaving, he pulled together every last bit of strength within him to reach out his arm and to tell me that he loved me. And he could barely mouth the words. He could barely bring his lips to move to tell me, but he kept repeating that he loved me until I left the room. And those were his final words. And Bruce's last words, even his very last words, were also his final act of service. Those of you who've known me for some time know that I was not always a follower of Christ. I was an absolute menace to society in high school. As I'm sure the people that went with me know, I'm sorry, whatever it was, I'm sorry. And then I was an arrogant frat boy for the first couple of years of college. It was cool, I met my wife, so I guess it worked out. But my testimony is that I knew that I was not walking the righteous path. I had no excuse because my example in the home growing up was Bruce Hayes. So I know what good looked like. I was never in doubt. I wasn't lost. Some people say they were lost before they met Jesus. I wasn't. I was running in the wrong direction and I knew it. But I had seen how he treated people growing up and what it looked like to read the Bible and then walk it every single day with consistency. And it wasn't until Bruce got sick that I was really forced to consider who my father was and what made him so good. What it was that gave him the sort of way with people, to leave a mark and to fill a room with this many people that know what he meant. It was his generosity. It was his service with his time, his money, and his effort. And that example of Christ-likeness in him is what helped me to turn my life around. I didn't know God, but I knew his most faithful servant. And I chased his example all the way back into Jesus' arms before I knew Jesus. And here's where the opportunity, I think, for a miracle really is. All of you also knew Bruce Hayes, just like I did. You felt his goodness, and you experienced his attitude of service. I want you to understand that what you felt was God working through Bruce. If one great legacy comes away from the tragedy of my father's death, I want you to know that there was nothing in Bruce that is not available to every person in this room, and that is the love of God. That was his motivation, that was his source of wisdom, will, integrity, and consistency. And it is available to every single person in this room. I've told Lauren a million times since I met her, I will never be worthy of Bruce Hayes' decision to adopt me, of all people, but I am eternally grateful. And I'm grateful for all of you, all the people in his life who gave him the chance to serve, the opportunity to demonstrate God's love, because without you, he would be in a void. He wouldn't be able to do anything. But with y'all, he had the opportunity to serve. And thank you all for coming here to celebrate him today. My prayer through all of this is that each of you really honestly reflects on Bruce's life with an open heart. His legacy is the rare kind that has the power to really change people. And again, I'm hoping that through this tragedy, that is the good that comes from it. That we don't let it go to waste, but that this is an opportunity to observe what it was that made Bruce great. And the God that enabled him to be that way. And I believe that will be his legacy. I believe that it will change people. I believe that the miracle will come to pass. Amen? Thank you.